don't know about you, but I really love yarn. In honor of Valentine's Day, I thought it would be fun to do a silly little experiment with one of the most classic Valentine's Day candies. And no, I'm not talking about chocolate. I will not try dyeing yarn with chocolate. I'm talking about these sweetheart candies that don't really taste like much, but are a classic because of their little messages and the agony you went over elementary school over with the message from your crush if it meant that they liked you too. But I think we can all agree that yarn loves all of us. And so this is a little homage to yarn, to ask the yarn to be our Valentine today. I know when I did the candy dyeing special after Halloween, I said I probably wasn't going to do it again, but I really just couldn't resist. In addition to the sweetheart candies, I also plan to use some red icing sugar to bring some more color into the yarn and to give sort of a reddish pink backdrop to what I hope will be some fun pastel patches that we get from these sweetheart candies. Since we love yarn here at the ChemKnits Tutorials YouTube channel, I decided to dye 3 skeins of yarn with this technique today. We are going to dye some 100% wool of the Andes, wool of the Andes superwash, which is the same, they have the same base, it's just this one has been treated, so it's a superwash yarn. And then our Stroll fingering yarn, which is a 75% superwash merino, 25% nylon blend. Now, I know that sprinkles bind to the sock yarn in more discreet patches than they do the 100% wool yarn. So I'm curious, and I expect that the superwash worsted weight yarn will look a lot more like the fingering weight yarn. But this is why I wanted to do the 3 of them for this fun Valentine's Day episode. And so we can tell them apart, I am going to mark one of the ties on the superwash yarn with some cotton thread. I am going to pre-soak the yarn in some plain tap water with 3 generous tablespoons of white vinegar. The candy actually does contain a little citric acid in it, but I don't expect that it's enough to make a huge amount of difference to the food coloring dissolving and binding to the yarn. So I'm going to let the yarn pre-soak in this acidic solution for at least 30 minutes. Unlike some of the other candies that we've looked at, like Skittles, these sweethearts contain color through the entire heart. So I'm curious what kind of effect this will give us on our yarn. I bought a total of 4 bags of these candy hearts for the experiment. 2 bags of the large hearts and 2 bags of the classic small hearts. I'm ready to start adding some of these red sprinkles to our 3 skeins of yarn. We've got the wool of the Andes worsted, the superwash worsted, and then our Stroll sock yarn up here in front. The only time I really used these sugar sprinkles on the wool of the Andes worsted yarn in the past was when I was dyeing yarn with sprinkles with Lucas. And I had him use up some of these sugar sprinkles on his yarn. And they didn't really register on the yarn very much for me. So I am curious what we'll see today when we're using a lot more of these sugar sprinkles. I am not wearing gloves right now, which might be a little bit of a mistake because I will probably dye my hands red, but I figured it'll just be a mark of the love that I am feeling this Valentine's Day, right? I also thought about, for this experiment, dyeing the yarn in advance of adding the candy hearts, but I thought that doing these sprinkles to add some maybe little specks with bigger specks would be a really fun way to go about it. Okay, so done both sides of the yarn, and now I'm just trying to check for good coverage. When I used these kinds of sprinkles on the stroll yarn in the past, I got, you know, almost like a cool halo effect where the color spread, but we also got some really nice discrete specks. There seems to be some pretty good coverage in the wool. Just trying to, but then when I use them on the sock blank, we got some pretty dark color. So I'm curious to see if this will affect the way that the candy hearts show up at all. But I think that it'll be fun. Okay. I've used up, well, I don't know how full this container was to begin with, but I still have some red sprinkles, so if I decide to add more in the end, I can. And hopefully not too many ended up on my floor. And my hand is minimally red right now. And now we can start adding our candy hearts to the yarn. I have no idea if the words on these hearts that are in sort of red will make much of a difference to anything really, but I am curious if these will add some color to the yarn and how easy or hard they will be to dissolve. Because when I did the sprinkles with Lucas, it took a lot longer for them to dissolve. So I think that at some point I'm going to need to add these yarns into some warm water to help. But, oh cool, I can already start seeing some pink color spread out. Need to insert some of these inside the yarn as well. This is really going to turn my hands red. But these hearts are so big that they should be able to stick onto multiple strands of yarn at a time, which is kind of cool. Yeah, I'm already seeing some like cool pink color spread from these sprinkles. Well, gee, maybe I'll only end up using 2 of the bags of these candy hearts. I know that most of the hearts are really on one side of the yarn, but I'm curious what I'm going to need to do to get these to penetrate. And I'm wondering if any of these are starting to get wet. Not quite. Oh, I should say that I did not, a lot of times when I am using these yarns, I will pre-soak, I will use the salad spinner to remove as much of the water as possible from the yarn, and I did not do that in this case. Right now I am really just adding these to the yarn, and I feel like especially in the stroll I'm not connecting with nearly as much of the fibers because there's so much more present. But we will just have to see how far these colors penetrate. Yeah. I know I might need to soak these in some water at some point, but all right, there we go. We have added some candy hearts to our yarn, and now we're going to need to heat it up and see what happens. All right. Let's start wrapping up these yarns. Oh yeah, I can see some green coming through there already. I'm gonna need to clean up the floor. I got some sprinkles everywhere. I guess I didn't mention that I did put plastic wrap down in advance to help so that way I could wrap up the yarn. But I'm now going to place this massive jelly roll of sorts into a microwave safe bowl. And I am going to microwave this on high, I think in 3-minute increments. And I'm going to start with a total of 6 minutes. Maybe I should be wearing gloves when I decorate cookies too. I've been caught red-handed. After 6 total minutes in the microwave, I can see that there's still a lot of sugar crystals that have not yet dissolved onto the yarns, in addition to the fact that we can see some intact candy hearts. I'm going to let this sit for 10 minutes before we microwave it again. I'm curious if we're getting any color off of the hearts. I have a feeling that I might need to remove some of these hearts manually, and that maybe we'll want to try playing with them in kind of a dye bath solution, because the color goes all the way through the hearts. After heating the yarn an additional 4 minutes, I feel like a lot more of the sprinkles have dissolved, at least on the outside. I mean, clearly I still have the candy hearts, but I am expecting to need to pick those off of the yarn. I'm trying to see if I can tell anything about any additional color, and I can't really yet. So we will just have to wait and let this cool a bit before we unwrap it. Our yarn is getting closer to room temperature. It's not quite completely cool, but I do want to transfer it into a basin of warm tap water. Ooh, you can see we've got some greenish runoff in here. Part of the rationale for this is that we can see we have a lot of candies still in here. And I know that these candies can dissolve. We've shown that in an experiment that I was running at the same time as this one. But I just kind of want to start this process going and maybe start removing some of the candy from our yarn. I just rotated this and zoomed in. So you can see that we've got candies that are kind of stuck to the yarns. I'm starting to remove some of these pieces if they feel like they will remove. But actually a lot more has dissolved than I thought. So that is kind of cool. Unlike the yarn that I'll be showing in the next episode, I know that I'm going to want to change this water a little more frequently with new warm tap water, because I don't want these colors to spread out too much as they dissolve in the rinse water. But check out some of these bright swatches of color. I bet this one is the 100% wool, because I'm not seeing as many splotches. And this is clearly our fingering weight yarn. And ooh, this must be the superwash yarn, where we've definitely got more discrete specks. I'm really excited to take a closer look at these. I don't want to agitate the fibers too much, but I will let this soak in this warm water for a couple more minutes before I switch out the water for some more hot tap water. Or actually, maybe I'll go ahead and do that now. I feel like a lot of stuff has come off, so I'm going to go ahead and just replace this water and then let it sit for maybe 5 minutes. I've only done one complete rinse of this yarn so far, but I think that a lot of progress has been made with the solid candy portions, although I just found one. But I think I'm ready to start adding soap to the mix. So again, this is only the second only the second rinse that I've done of this yarn. And I'm going to continue to add warm water to the yarn because I want to encourage the candy to dissolve. But I'm also going to now start adding some dish soap. Now, two of the yarns in here are superwash and one is not. So I don't want to do too much agitation. But I know that these yarns do still need a fair amount of rinsing because of the sheer amount of candy that was present. You can see that the rinse water is still fairly translucent. So I am going to leave this slightly soapy yarn in here to soak for a little while before I do the next rinse. And that's going to be kind of a rinse repeat kind of thing. As I add water, I will slowly use less and less heat in it, but this is looking rather good right now in terms of there not being very much candy left in the yarn at all. I am so excited to see what the final yarn looks like. But unless there is anything remarkable about the rest of the rinsing of this, you'll next see the yarn when it's finished and dried. Here is a close-up of our finished dry yarns. We have our worsted weight, non-superwash 100% wool, our superwash 100% wool worsted weight yarn, and then our sock yarn, which is 75% superwash merino, 25% nylon. And if you look closely, in the non-superwash yarn, we have these splotches of color. And there's speckling in here for sure from the sugar sprinkles. But the color is a lot more subtle because it seems to have spread out a lot more. When we start looking at our superwash yarn, you can see these discrete specks because the dye from our sprinkles looks like it just absorbed really quickly to where it was and did not spread out on the yarn. But then if we look at our wool nylon blend, the specks are even more discreet. And I don't know if the nylon is really playing a role in here or not, or if the fact that the yarn is thinner, so therefore if one sprinkle is hitting two pieces of yarn, we end up with a smaller speck than we might have on our worsted weight superwash yarn. But I think that this result is a really cool example about the difference between superwash yarns and untreated wool and the way that you can dye them with food coloring and acid dyes. Why do I say acid dyes? In some of my preliminary experiments with Jacquard acid dyes, it looks like it behaves really similarly with respect to superwash versus untreated wool. But these episodes will come out at a future date and I look forward to chatting more about that. This experiment worked way better than I could have expected. We have some fantastic splotches of color on our sock yarn, our superwash yarn, and our 100% wool yarn. These splotches from our candy hearts combined with the specks or more mottled feel here on the 100% wool really give this yarn a lot of dimension and make it a perfect Valentine's Day yarn. I am a little surprised by how pink the yarns look. I think I expected the red sprinkles to end up reading a little red, whereas right now it kind of feels a little hot pink. So I wonder what kind of color it would have felt like if I had used the hot pink sugar sprinkles instead of the red ones. But nevertheless, I think that these colors are really exciting. I wanted to give another close-up of our 100% wool yarn so you could see that we definitely have some speckling in here. It is just significantly more subtle than the speckling that we see in the superwash yarn, where in this yarn you can really feel where the sprinkles landed on the yarn because you see the specks. In all three cases, and this is the sock yarn now, the candy hearts left really bright splotches of color. I am really excited with how well defined they are. I mean, look at this purple and the blue. Very rarely are there candies that have that good of a blue. When I first decided to do this experiment, I decided to add the sugar sprinkles because I had pretty low expectations for the color that we would get from the candy hearts. I knew that we would end up with some large splotches of color, but I think I underestimated the depth of color we would get from these candy hearts because they are so pastel on their own right. I think I just must have forgotten that there is color all the way through the candy heart. So there is a lot of food coloring in each one, which, maybe it's something you want to consider if you're going to eat them, but they're a great tool for a dyeing yarn. I was so concerned about how this would work that I actually started a second video dyeing with these candy hearts, while doing it in a kettle, because I knew for sure that the candy hearts would dissolve while on the stovetop, but I was unsure if this microwaving would give us the results I was hoping for at all. And I am beyond thrilled with this technique. It's funny. When the day after Halloween I dyed yarn with candy, I laughed and said that it was something that I would never do again because, it was something sort of ridiculous and not really that worthwhile. Yet, here I am, clearly having done this technique again and thinking, maybe this is something really worth trying after all. So, if you go to the store today and you see some clearance candy hearts, maybe it's worth picking some up if you can get them at a good discount to play around using them as a dye source. What do you think? Please let me know in the comments. I am Rebecca from ChemKnits, and thank you so much for watching this fun Valentine's Day special episode. Stay tuned for another dyeing video featuring these candy hearts, which will be released in a couple of hours.